Dun, 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 dun. And we are live.
We have liftoff. That's
We do.
appropriate, isn't it? For
It is
Houston?
very appropriate
Absolutely.
for today's
So,
location.
hello, folks. Tuesday, here we go again.
All
So,
right.
are you creeping into the holiday season yet? I noticed that, what are they called? Kmart, they've got Easter eggs. So
Yeah,
it must
right.
be
But
nearly
it must
Christmas.
be Christmas. They're advertising
Nearly
Easter.
Christmas.
Exactly. Anyway, so before we digress, today's show will be an absolute must for all of you foodie friends and everybody out there in foodie world, and also all of our friends in and around Houston, of which there are lots, thanks to our next guest and our friend Barry Coffing, who introduced us in the first place. And David Skinner, you'll see from the bottom crawl, is quite the man. They call him Willy Wonka of food. And we are very pleased to welcome him today from all the way live, and things drop out the ceiling and dogs bark and pies go flying. Here he is, Chef David Skinner.
Oh, hi, Chef. Good
Hello.
morning.
Good
Good
morning.
afternoon for you. Hi.
It is afternoon for me. So.
Yeah.
And thank you for taking the time, especially today, because I know you're off to Mexico City tomorrow to do a food and wine dinner,
Oh,
correct?
that's right. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm.
So
4 o'clock in the morning. That's going to be fun.
Oh, that'll be lovely. Oh,
4 o'clock in the morning.
Oh.
Boy,
gosh.
Yeah.
nice planning. Nicely done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know you've been on the show before a few years ago. Gosh, it's probably 3 or 4 now.
Probably about 3 years, I think. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, it's been a while.
And
We've all grown, well, not maybe you, I've grown several more chins.
I've
Yeah,
probably
well,
grown a few wrinkles also.
Yeah. Oh,
sitting,
yeah.
Sitting in the house through a pandemic will do that for you. So back to the beginning, back to the egg, as they
Yes.
say.
Tell me about your grandma, your Choctaw grandma.
Well, it was actually my great grandmother that
Oh, was it? Uh-huh.
Yep. And so I grew up in Oklahoma, and I can remember my great grandmother actually fairly well. I've got some good pictures with her, and she was probably I was probably maybe like 9 or 10, I'm thinking, when she died, something like that. So I had a reasonable amount of time with her, and she was quite the feisty lady. Reminds me of you, Angie. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And but we used to we'd make beef jerky and hardtack and things like that, and she would tell me stories, and of course, being that young, a lot of times you're just like, yeah, whatever,
Right.
Where's my GI Joe, right? But
pearls before swine. My
yeah,
grandmother used to say.
pearls of wisdom kind of rolled off your back. Wish I'd written all those down, but
I know. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, she was quite the interesting lady, and then my grandmother was the one that really got me into food. She was the pastry chef, and so yeah, that kind of led me on to what I'm doing now, which is different than what I did for 30 years. So
yeah, that's the fascinating part I find about your career, is that you had a restaurant at 16 and then another one at 17 or 18, and then decided to do the responsible thing because you had, wanted to fall in love and have a family. And speaking of pastry chefs, your gorgeous daughter Mackenzie is quite the baker too, isn't she?
Oh, yes.
She is. She really is. It's she's
yes.
I think ahead of me in the definitely in the pastry arts. She's better than I at decorating cakes. My grandmother really tried, but I just didn't have the dexterity for it or something, and it just frustrated me. So I kind of gave up early on. But Mackenzie did really well at pastry, but she's going to college and getting a degree in international business and marketing, and so that will suit her well.
She may come back to pastry in the end, just like her dear old dad came back to food.
More than likely something like that'll happen. She keeps telling me she wants to have a coffee shop and bakery on the side. Whatever she does.
She's super artistic. So Mac is one of these kids. You just look at something and draw it. It's just it's a talent for sure.
Well, she'd be able to keep you in luxury in your old age.
That's right.
When that happens.
Older, exactly, is that she has to keep me in the same style that I've kept her. So
that's the one.
Fair dues.
So how old were you when you sort of started to get really just not just making beef jerky and being around pastry. You got some important knives at a young age, didn't you? Or a knife?
Yeah, well, I guess I was probably the oldest memory I kind of have was really about 4, and I'd asked my grandmother to make me a carousel cake, which she did. So like a like a carousel with horses and all that, and I think that's probably what for me kind of said, "Ooh, food's interesting. You can kind of do anything with food," and then when I was probably about 11 or 12, she gave me a Sabatier chef's knife and Julia Child's cookbooks, and just said, "Here, you should start here. Don't worry if you fail and if they don't come out quite right. That's okay. That's all part of the process, and you'll learn how to do it." And so for God, probably a year and a half, 2 years, every Sunday at our house was some Julia Child, cooking marathon. And growing up, it used to be, Sunday roast or fried chicken or something like that. And next thing you knew, it was, aspics and pate and croûte and,
Lovely.
Beef bourguignon. Beef bourguignon.
beef bourguignon.
You have to say it in a special voice.
That's right.
Oh,
That's exactly how she talked.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was fun and also quite educational. Learned lots of things about French cooking and a lot of things that I don't really care for. Mostly aspics, but although I've got a more of appreciation for them now than I did when I was probably 12 or 13.
They were aspic is, for those of you who are not like gourmet foodies, aspic is like a gelée, like a jelly that we used to have them in England. We'd have what we called a gala pie,
Yes.
and it was hard-boiled eggs packed with either ham or force meat, like almost like a Scotch egg, and then in a wet pastry, like a boiled pastry, and then they would cover the top with jelly. And I suppose in the old days, it was instead of refrigeration, it was to keep everything from
I think
the air from getting at it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, even still now, if you order duck pate or chicken liver pate in a restaurant, in the mason jars, it'll come with an aspic on top of it.
Yeah.
So I suppose if you can get past the texture and just think about it as meat jello,
which is what it is.
Yeah.
Basically.
Have we tried making it into a cocktail?
Right. Yeah. We'll get to that later. If you think about, it's probably all the good stuff.
Oh yeah.
It's probably really good.
Oh yeah, all the collagen. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm surprised somebody hasn't got it. A Kardashian hasn't got it, as a cosmetic.
They may be watching.
Put it on your face.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Meat on your face. So, all right. So now you've cooked all the way through the Julia Child cookbook. You're probably about 14 or 15 by this?
Something like that. Yeah.
Right. And what were you studying in school? Were you taking like home ec or anything like that?
No, just regular high school, But I had a magic store at that time, and
of course you did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Started that when I was 13. And
you were a late bloomer, weren't you?
I was a late bloomer. Yeah.
Lazy
Had a little brick and mortar. It was about 300 square feet, so a little tiny store. But I'd worked.
Where was this? Is this in Ponca City?
In Ponca City, yeah.
Oklahoma.
Yeah.
I didn't know you dabbled in magic. We actually had some magic with you one time. Do you remember?
Oh yes.
Okay, that's another story for another day.
Yeah.
Indeed. So, wow. Okay. So magic store. And then what enticed you to open a restaurant?
Well, I was talking to my grandmother, and she had a gourmet store. So, if you think about kind of a, modern day Williams-Sonoma, Sur La Table kind of thing, that's pretty much what it was. And so that's what I grew up in. And, and she would actually have, at the time, even they were fairly famous chefs that would come through and they do cooking demonstrations and sign cookbooks and things like that. So like Joyce Chen taught me how to make Chinese noodles,
Wow.
and yeah. So I had all kinds of really interesting, people come through, and of course back then, I mean, this was like early 80s, late 70s, and
Very progressive for that time.
yeah, and um yeah, chefs were just cooks. I mean, there wasn't like the
No.
star power today and things like that. They were just, again, just ordinary people trying to sell their cookbook or their pots and pans or whatever, and they would come through, and
It was pre-Shep Gordon and
yeah,
Emerald Lagasse and all
exactly.
of that.
Yeah,
I love that. I love that story of Shep. Again, for those of you who don't know, there's a movie called Supermensch, and this wonderful man called Shep Gordon, who lives on Maui now, he managed Alice Cooper, and he moved to LA and got a limo and just hung out and gave rock stars free rides and got into the management business. And after a while, he thought, well, why don't chefs get paid to go do these big arena shows and cooking demonstrations? And so he switched, and he managed Emerald, and he still has a bunch out on Sanchez and a bunch of people that he works with. But if he hadn't come along and started treating chefs like rock stars, who knows where the business would still be, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But I mean, Julia Child was kind of a rock star in her own
she was
way.
She was one of a kind.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
What was the circumstance of how you got to shake her hand?
Yeah, so first time I met her, I actually just wrote her a letter and said, well, it kind of helped that I had a French restaurant, when I was 16 years old, and I think that probably intrigued her quite a bit. And I told her that I kind of grew up cooking her recipes and watching her TV show and things like that. And anyway, and she was just kind of like, well, if you ever come to San Francisco, and I was like, okay. So next thing I know, I'm buying a ticket, going to San Francisco.
Awesome.
But
wow.
Anyway, yeah, she was quite an interesting
character.
Yeah, exactly like she is. I mean, there's no difference. There wasn't a on screen, off screen. That was Julia the whole time.
Yeah.
Wow, man. But what an inspiration for a young man to be able to actually meet his hero and have it.
It was.
Oh, no. Good experience,
It was, for sure. And,
that's crazy. And then so that was La Vie en Rose, right? The French restaurant you had. So did Christopher's on Main, was that before or after? Which order did they?
That was after. So so the French restaurant, so I named it after the Edith Piaf song, of course.
Yeah.
And it was in my grandmother's gourmet shop. She had some space in the back. So the shop was basically kind of one level, but there was a second story kind of mezzanine in the very back of the building.
Uh-huh.
And she just used it for storage. I mean, there's really nothing in it. And she's like, why don't you just take that space and turn it into a restaurant, and and then you can see if that's really what you want to do. So
right.
I put in a sort of a deli style kitchen on the first floor, and then the seating area was up in the mezzanine. And I'd work it after school and on weekends, and it turned out really, really well. People love the food, and I think they also kind of love the story. It's like, hey, let's go see what this kid's making, and very traditional, French food, and then it caught on so well that everybody's like, well, you've got to start doing lunch. And I'm like, well, it's kind of hard since I'm in school. And so I came up with a lunch menu, and then we hired some employees, and next thing you knew, we had a full kind of lunchtime business and nighttime business. And
wow.
Well, and you because as a 16-year-old kid, I was making tons of money, and I was I told my mother, I'm like, I'm not going to college. Why would I do that? I'm making tons. Of course, back then, it seemed like tons of money. Now I look at it and it's like, oh, thank God I didn't just stick with that. But
Yeah.
Well, but the thing is, you also got to learn the lesson about food costs and hiring and firing and
Yeah.
personnel and cleaning and
Exactly.
licensing and
Yeah.
marketing and there's so
Mhm.
much more that goes into
dealing
a
with the health
restaurant. It's
department.
not just being handy
Yeah.
with a knife and a pan, is it?
Yeah, I know it's very different than just cooking for yourself or family. And anyway, so that did really, really quite well. And my mother sort of guilted me, forced me into
Going to college.
going to college.
Yep.
So I went to Oklahoma State, which was about 45 minutes away, so not too far.
Mhm.
And anyway, after about 2 years, because I'd come back home on the weekends and work in the restaurant and stuff, and I was like, there's nothing like this in Stillwater. Matter of fact, at the time when I was going to school there, it was really fast food only. And I'm like, there's not a fine dining place to eat. There's not
Wow.
anything like that.
You would
So
think with a big university like Oklahoma State that people would have jumped all over that.
yeah, you would think so.
The parents and the well-to-do students, Yeah. It's crazy.
Mhm.
So when did you decide to open, like Eculent or where you are now, Clear Creek, Eculent?
Well, there was a big gap in the middle, wasn't there?
Yeah.
There's a big
Oh,
gap.
that's right. You went
30
and got,
years.
30 years,
you
yeah.
went and got a proper
Something
job.
like that. Oh, interesting thing. Well, not to, well, I guess today technically is. So yesterday was Eculent's 9th anniversary.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, the 7th. So we opened November 7th, 2014.
Wow.
And so so today starts our 10th year.
Congratulations. That's
Wow.
wonderful.
Yeah.
But again, even though you stepped away from the apron and the stove for 30 years to go into business,
I still kept cooking. Yeah.
You still kept cooking, but that would be what afforded you the chance to go and eat in Barcelona and Japan or travel to China and learn about the food and all of that stuff around the world, right? So had you not had those corporate years, you might still be battling it out as a chef and never been able to go to Disfrutar in Barcelona or even know about Ferran Adria or any of those guys, right?
Right. Yeah. So that was, like I said, my mother sort of forced me to go, and it was, you should always listen to your mother. They're usually right.
Now he
They're usually
tells you.
quite right.
What are you talking about, Holmes?
Yeah, exactly.
How you doing?
But she's like, the only way to, really know if this is what you want to do is to do something else. And you already know that you can cook, and you already know you can, run a successful restaurant. So once you learn something else, and so that's what I did. And then I kind of got hooked and ended up with multiple degrees, multiple bachelor's degrees, and then on to a master's, and almost went into a doctorate, but I was just like, yeah, that's too much commitment.
Bridge too far.
A little bit of a bridge too far. And so started working in oil and gas, and did almost a decade with Conoco, and then decided to leave and start my own firm, and did that for another almost 20 years. And
yep.
Yeah.
And now there's a story where you're on a plane to somewhere and you're trying to think of all the things that don't exist in restaurants, right?
Yeah. So it's kind of the story of how Eculent got started. I was on a flight to Beijing, and from Houston, it's a long flight.
Yes.
And I remember I had gone to, I won't say what restaurant it was, but I eaten at a restaurant in Airport. It was a regular sit down, not fine dining by any means, but nice restaurant.
Mhm.
And of course, on the way over, I started getting sick, and I was just like, well, of all places, to have
Food poisoning
food poisoning,
on an airplane.
it has to be on a long flight to China, right? It's like, I'm waiting for the snare drum to go. It's just like,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, but it was a kind of a watershed, in being able to think about, okay, well, what kind of restaurant hasn't been done before, what kind of restaurant should be at a an airport, and why can't they make good food, right? And
Right.
And that kind of led to, well, what kind of restaurants just never been done before, and that's where Eculent was born, was basically on that trip, come up with a restaurant that no one's done.
And you have.
And we have.
Yeah.
And you have, and you keep doing it, because you're introducing new menu items this quarter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Working on stuff.
Yeah.
So
and then we have the new restaurant, the Preserve, which is
Yes.
Native American and Thai, which no one's ever done that before either. So
no, they call you the Willy Wonka of food for good reason. So you guys, if you see across the bottom scrolling, go to Eculent.com. Tell the kids where the name came from.
So Esculent is Latin to be eaten, but Esculent.com was taken. So, but I really like the meaning of the word, and I like the word, so I played around with it for a little bit, and all of a sudden I took the S out, and I'm like, oh, I like that. Matter of fact, I like it even better. So
Yep.
that's where.
And because it sounds like excellent as well.
I know.
Right.
Yeah.
And excellent it is. Absolutely.
Oh, I know. We've had
Diana's asking, have you incorporated any Native American cuisine? So, are you okay? You need to go?
Yeah. I was just telling Kristen something.
Okay. So Diana's asking, have you incorporated any Native American cuisine, which is what the Preserve is all about? So do tell about how you met Chef G and Graham in a gas station and came up with the crazy idea of doing Choctaw food across the timeline of 3,000 years or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the new restaurant. So I'd been doing sort of Native American recipes in Eculent for a while, and probably like the last 3 or 4 years. And the funny part was they were some of the most popular courses. So I thought, I wonder if we did a restaurant that was just Native American, would that go? Would it be interesting? And it was not long before that I had met Chef G and Graham at Street to Kitchen. It's a Thai restaurant in Houston. Used to be in a gas station. They just moved to a much larger space because of their success. And
because she won Best Chef Texas.
Won Best Chef Texas, James Beard. Yeah. That kind of helps. Yeah.
You go, girl.
Exactly. And so anyway, I was talking to them one day, and I just said, would you guys be interested in partnering on a restaurant? And they were like, with you? Absolutely. What do you want to do? And then I said, well, I've got this really kind of crazy idea. What would you think about this idea of an Indigenous restaurant? And they were like, well, that sounds really interesting. What's your thought? And I said, well, everybody thinks of Thai food as hot and spicy, and G's food definitely will, blow your head off with spice. But
it wasn't always that way, though, was it?
It was not always that way. That's a modern thing. That's like the last 500 years, right?
Oh, right. That's modern. Yeah.
That's modern.
food
Well,
it is.
Of course it
Absolutely.
is, yeah.
well, you're 94, so I mean that's only like 4 or 5
I'm
times.
not 94 for a week yet.
Oh, for a week. Oh, I'm
Next-
sorry. We've
next
still got a
Tuesday,
week.
sir.
We
Please
still got a
hold
week.
off on the diamond bracelet. There's a good
Okay. All right. All right. But anyway, it's a fairly modern thing. So it happened from the Portuguese.
Oh.
And on the Native American side, I mean, 60% of all the world's cuisine owe their ingredients and a lot of their cooking techniques to Native Americans.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, so you would not, I mean, if you think about Italian food without tomatoes,
Right.
Irish
Irish food without potatoes.
food without potatoes. So
Yeah.
tomatoes, potatoes, onions, chilies, peppers, corn, squash, beans, all
All of
those things,
that
came
travel.
from North and South America.
Right.
So,
Yeah. It's just fascinating when you look at the map, the menu, the preserve. Go to
Mhm.
thepreserve.com. It's spelt without the vowels. Look across the bottom
Right.
there.
THPRSRV.
Yeah. It's incredible, the journey and the timeline that's on that map of things that, we sort of just take for granted now. But the Native Americans, both North and South America, have been raising and cultivating them for years. And so many of those things are disappearing. And that's what I love about what you've done. And, the panel that you guys were just on at Chef's Roll with Dana Thompson and Chef Crystal Wapepa. You're allowing Native American purveyors to preserve seeds and grow things that would otherwise be extinct, right? I mean, it's literally, it's like the seed vault in Svalbard, up in Iceland. If you don't have native restaurants and educate people to eating the food, these things will die out, and they're all meant to be here for health reasons. They taste good, but we need these things for nutritional value, don't we?
Right. We do. And so anyway, I had this idea of, what if because if you go back beyond the spice trade and the Portuguese, the cooking techniques of the Thais, the ingredients they use for the most part, almost the same,
Right.
Excuse me.
Good heart.
Allergies this month. And so it, and even like tradition, so like the most Native American tribes would have a pot of stew or something going, in the middle of the village, and would welcome whoever came upon them, to have a meal.
Nice.
And it was the same thing with the Thais. Yeah. So when we started looking at that, it's like, okay, well, if we go back, 1,000 years, 2,000 years, the cultures are very much the same, even though they're, opposite ends of the world, very similar in how they would treat guests, very similar on cooking techniques, very similar on preservation techniques, very similar on a lot of ingredients. The thing that was a little different with the Thais is they would not eat any large animals. So they mostly would eat like fish and shellfish and things like that. But large animals,
Right.
those were considered sacred. They wouldn't kill them. So it was a little bit different. Indians would take down bison and other deer and things like that. But they would eat lots of small things too, like rabbits and squirrels and possum and that, and so would the Thais. So it was as we started to do our research, and we spent about a year and a half researching the timeline, researching the recipes, and it's hard because most everything is oral tradition, and one of the things when G was working on the gangsum, which is a curry, it's an orange curry, but it has no citrus in it, even though it tastes like it does. What she didn't realize was how old that recipe was. So as we started to research it, we figured out it was about 1,400 years old, but it was a recipe that her grandmother and her mother had taught her. And again, it was just this thing that was handed down over, generation after generation. And kind of a very unknown curry. It's not like a typical curry you would think of.
Wow.
So um, so we had a really kind of fun time, researching all of this. And I worked with the Choctaw Cultural Center and their food historian, and looking at all the old documents that they had, and kind of figuring out what could we do, and what was true to it. So
Yep.
when we built the menu, the hardest thing for me was no salt, no pepper.
Wow.
Especially for those early ingredients, because salt was a precious commodity. It was
Right.
more.
Well, that's where the word salary comes from. It comes
Exactly from salt.
salt.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it was more used for monetary reasons than
Yep. Worth
disease.
is, and that's where
Worth
the
is salt.
worth
Yeah.
is salt. Oh,
Yep.
she's worth salt.
Oh,
Yep.
yeah.
And pepper, had not made its way to the Americas, because that really came from India and Thailand. So
Yep.
the long black pepper. So it's interesting. And chicken, everybody eats chicken now. Chicken was the product of the red jungle fowl from Thailand and the gray jungle fowl from China, and they bred them, and that turned into kind of modern day chicken. So one of the things that we do during dinner is we walk people through this timeline, and we explain to them how ingredients went from continent to continent, and how it impacted and changed the the cuisine and the culture, kind of everywhere it went, everything it touched.
Wow. Fascinating.
And,
Yeah.
So how do people perceive, what would one expect, let's say, at an evening at the preserve? It's obviously it's a multi-course tasting menu, but
Right.
it's also very educational, right?
It is. Yeah, it's a 15-course tasting menu.
Wow.
Usually lasts 2.5 to 3 hours for dinner. And we explain the history behind the courses and the ingredients. We have the only Indigenous wine program in the country, and probably the world, that I know of.
And that's two of the gals are Camins to Dreams, right? Up here in
Mhm.
California. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, a lot of times you might hear Indigenous wine program, and people talk about Indigenous grapes. We don't look at at grapes or the source of the ingredients. What we're talking about is Indigenous makers,
The people
So,
behind it.
Indigenous winemakers, and we have sort of scoured the globe looking for all kinds of different, So we've got Bantu winemakers, and we've got Basque winemakers, and we've got Native American winemakers, and
Right.
it's a very interesting, very eclectic wine tasting that goes along with it. But we felt we wanted to stay true to the theme behind the restaurant, and if we just put in plain old Cab and Chardonnay, it would, number one, it wouldn't really go with the food, but number two, it just doesn't do justice for the.
Well, but
spotlight.
you have your own winery, don't you? Clear Creek, and you are Choctaw.
Yeah, so technically my wines are Indigenous.
Which also includes, you didn't think you were
Yes.
get away without
McCartney's wines. Absolutely.
Dave. So David is the winemaker for Angie's fruit and dessert wines and cocktail mixes.
Yes.
And that's a funny story. We were down there, weren't we, doing a dinner with the McCartneys for Linda McCartney breast cancer. So we're staying at right next door. There's a nice little bed and breakfast place. And I kept walking across the patio to Eculent, to the original restaurant. And we saw this huge tower, this huge thing that said Clear Creek Winery. And I said to David, what's that all about? And he said, that's my winery. I'm like, son of a bitch, we've been here 5 days and you have the keys to a winery?
Mm-hmm.
No wonder he didn't tell us. Exactly.
He's like, 2 old tarts from Liverpool, not a chance.
Not a chance.
But we wound up making Mrs. McCartney's cocktail mixes and dessert wines, and so but the winery thing is difficult, and Graham's great at that, right? I mean, he's just got his
that's Graham's forte,
and that's Graham Painter, who is Chef G's husband and partner, who is studying for all of his sommelier degrees
Mm-hmm.
But no, it's got to be a heck of a research and a journey. It surprises me it only took you a year and a half to put it together, actually. But
Yeah,
Diana,
well, I think, we both kind of leaned on what we had learned from our grandmothers, and I had some recipes and so forth, and really having the cultural center, and the help from them.
available to you.
Yes.
Right.
That,
Right.
that made a big
Diana's asking, will you ever go nationwide, Chef David, at other restaurants, maybe say in New York or anything?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
Too much traveling and too much corporate. You
Yeah,
got out of corporate,
much.
right?
I was tired of commuting.
Yeah.
That's why the
What was-
restaurant's a mile from my house.
What was your connection with NASA?
Oh, NASA. Well, so Eculent's about 5 miles from NASA, and so we get NASA people in all the time. Astronauts down to people that just work on different parts of the space program. And matter of fact, Clay Anderson was their opening night for Eculent, and I can't remember, but I think he spent something like 215 days on the space station. He'd been up there 2 or 3 times, and
Tell the kids about that reservation call you got one day.
no, yeah. We did get a reservation made from the space station once. And,
Of course you did.
yeah, that was kind of special, and I thought it was actually just a joke,
Right.
But it really was from the
I'm
space.
orbiting above you, and I wanted to see if I could get my wife and I in because I'll splash down on this date, and it's our anniversary, and it was like, okay, I've had a lot of creative, requests to get into the restaurant, but this one, kind of takes the cake. And then the next morning, I got an email from NASA that was like, "This is real. Is there any way you could get him in?" I'm like, "Believe me, of course
We'll bump him up the wait list.
We'll bump him up the wait list and get him in." But
I was on the phone to Chef, and he's like, "I'm being called to the phone. I'll call you back." And he says, "I've just had like the longest distance reservation. Guess where somebody's coming from?" I'm like, "Tokyo." He's like, "No, further." I'm like, South Pole. He's like, "No, further." In his space station. I'm like, "Well, technically it's only 65 miles." So
when it's above us, yeah.
but it splashed out
in a different
indeed.
direction.
That is just absolutely crazy. So we should touch on Meticulous Spirits, but of course we should tell the folks about your trip to Spain and how this crazy thing came up with the idea. And we were lucky enough to work on designing the logo with Jared. And that is the Meticulous Gin.
Yeah.
Gin.
So, having the winery, kind of used to, well, at least I thought I was used to all the alcohol laws, but it gives you kind of an appreciation for the government and all their bureaucracy. But I always kind of had an idea, every now and then we'll have like a bad batch of wine and we end up like dumping it down the sewer. And not very often, but occasionally. And I was like, I should really just, if I could distill it, I could turn it into vodka or something and not lose it. And then, of course, Texas, we've had a real boon in distilleries, of kind of all sorts, but in particular like bourbons and stuff. And I was looking at that and it's like, bourbon, there's an awful lot of solids handling and things like that. I just don't think I want to do it. And so even though I thought it was a great idea, I just kind of put it on the back burner. And then I went to Spain and went to the Jim Marais distillery. Yeah. Just outside of Barcelona. And we actually the little group that I was traveling with, we had their marketing director that, spent the afternoon with us and made us all kinds of wonderful cocktails and was showing us around the place. And I just kept looking and I'm like, well, where do you make this? There was just this little chapel, like the size of a large dining room, basically.
A few hundred square feet, right?
A few hundred square feet, and they had 100-gallon and a 25 or 50-gallon pot still in there. And I'm thinking, well, this is just like for show. It's marketing, right? And I was like, where do you make all this? He goes, right here. And I'm like, no, where? Like, where here? He's like, in this room you're standing in. And I'm like, those two stills make all of your booze? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, well, but how many cases a year do you do? He's like 80,000. And I'm looking at him like, I can't do the math. I said, can you walk me through how this works? And he's like, oh, sure, and then went on to explain that, the day we were there was the one day that they're off. They run 6 days a week. But not on Monday. Yeah, not on Mondays. And he's like, yeah, well, we do all the botanicals here in these two stills, and then we compound it with French neutral spirits that are usually wheat. And I was like, oh, that's
cooking. It's back to chemistry. It's a recipe.
Chemistry and cooking and a recipe and in a very small space. And I'm like, well, I have space to put these kind of stills in the winery. That's not going to take up much room at all. And
Meticulous.
And so when I came back, I started kind of researching,
right,
how much space am I going to have and things like that. And we started the application process, and then in the middle of the application process, the government shut down. So that delayed us for a little while. Yeah. And then we finally got our permits and put in the stills and started making some things and playing around with it. And so the thing that makes us kind of different, well, a couple of things make us different. One, it's really more of a chef driven distillate. So I'm kind of very particular about the flavor profiles of each of the products. I have a really good distiller that's very meticulous, which is kind of hence the name Meticulous Spirits. We actually do sort of micro batching. I mean, our stills are 50 gallon stills, so they're fairly small to begin with. But when we're actually running the column and getting the product out, we put it in 1 gallon jugs so that we can really figure out where the hearts and the heads are, and the tails. And a lot of distillers will just either look at temperature rise in the column or different things like that and just kind of say, oh, that's good enough. We take it down to the gallon, and you can literally just smell them, from gallon to gallon to gallon, and you can tell at what point have you gone from hearts to tails. And
what does that mean, hearts to tails, for people?
So hearts are what you really want. So hearts are the really good, flavorful. They're not astringent. They all the kind of harsh chemicals. Matter of fact, the things that if you were drinking moonshine would make you go blind, that's usually in the heads. So it's like the first stuff that comes off, right? And moonshiners didn't care. They just run the whole thing and blend it all together, and it is what it is. But you definitely don't want the heads. Those will make you go blind. And you don't really want the tails because it's just kind of nasty stuff. So what you want is the heart. So it's kind of the middle part of the run, and so we're just very particular about exactly where that is, and I wanted to do products that you could literally sip on or pour over an ice cube. They're great in cocktails, but you don't have to have a cocktail to enjoy them. Too many products are just kind of mediocre, and it's like, it's great, but it's only great if you put it in a cocktail, right? You need juices or other things to mask the off-putting flavors or the heat, right? Sometimes they can have a lot of burn, and so we wanted these to be really, really pure delicious. And that
Right.
that was the goal. And then the last part that kind of makes us different is, most products that you buy, unless you've got something that's like a cask strength, barrel strength, like a bourbon,
Mhm.
or something, they're going to be cut with water. And
Wow.
generally, like if you're drinking, you buy a bottle of vodka, half of it's alcohol and half of it's water. I mean, that's just how it is. Um,
To dilute it to the strength proof.
to get it down to the proof that you're looking to sell it at, which is
Right.
generally for vodkas and things 40
40.
proof. So
Right.
yeah. And so anyway, you're dealing with water. Most distillers just use tap water, just whatever comes from the city they're in, or whatever. Some of them will clean it up and run it through a column, or at least charcoal filters and things like that,
Right.
take chlorine and various impurities out.
So do you use water? If so, where's it from?
No. So I spent about 6 months trying all the different waters from all over the world to see what I thought was going to taste the best.
Right.
And we ended up with a water from Italy. Comes out of the Adiamo Reserve, and so it's basically glacier water. And it's a 7.4 pH. It's a 7.2 pH, and it's just, I think, the most perfect water for what
For distilling with. Yeah.
for what we're doing. Yeah, and it's it's
Wow.
expensive, so we have to bring our water in from Italy.
Right.
But I think it makes a really fantastic product, and it's very different. And everybody that tries our product is just like, this is not at all what I was expecting. They can't believe how smooth it is, that it
Right.
doesn't have a burn, that you literally can just drink it like right out of the bottle.
Well, I'm
And
going to be trying your vodka on Saturday night at Street.
yes, you will. That's
Street
right. That's
Kitchen,
right.
because
You're gonna have a meticulous martini. Yeah.
I am, indeed.
Um,
And then be flat on my back.
well, I hope not, but we'll
Well,
see.
I couldn't be flat on my front. That's for dang sure.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Oh, behave.
I meant my belly.
So that's kind of how that.
Wow, what a story. So we can't close without talking a little bit about Around the World in 10,000 Bites, and that other crazy idea that you came up with that we were so lucky to be a part of on the filmic side.
How long ago was it?
It was August 2019. It was right before the world shut down.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Wow.
So
we were
we
planning
need to update that website, by the way, because
we were planning to do another one, and then then the pandemic shut everything down, and then we were looking to do one when things started open up, and then it looked like
hurricane season.
COVID, hurricane season, COVID is like everything. So anyway, hopefully if things go well, 24, hopefully we'll be able to do another one. But
so in brief, so for our regular viewers, so Chef had this crazy idea of putting lots and lots of little bites, courses, on plates, and his idea was to put 10,000 bites of food out in front of 100 people. And we had, in the end, with stages and sous chefs and executive chefs and chefs de cuisine and all of that, we had 43 chefs from 10 countries, and Chef curated and did his best P.T. Barnum at the Dinosaur Hall of the Houston Natural History Museum, and it was actually 110 people and 101 courses. And when I asked Chef, I said, why do you need 101 courses? What's the 101st course? He said, oh, it's a 3D printed chocolate bookmark for the program in case they're hungry on the way home.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my Lord.
Well, nobody was hungry after that dinner. No, that was 6 hours of marathon eating. We started at 6 o'clock and finished at midnight. And
amazing.
Yeah. People had 100 courses. We did it at the Museum of Natural Science. And it was definitely an evening that will never happen again, at least like that. Yeah.
It will live in gourmet infamy, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And we had local local staple grandpa Indo-Pak Kaiser Lashkari with his amazing stuff, and Aaron Bluedorn. And Manu Bafara flew up from Brazil. Do you remember trying to get her food through customs?
Yes, I do.
I hope you don't have the same trouble at Mexico City Airport tomorrow.
I hope not either.
Yeah. Well, you're only taking dried beans, right? So.
Right. Yeah. Some dried.
Put those in your wellies. They'll never know.
And that's a food and wine dinner. But that website, which is clearly out of date, but we'll be working on, is around the world in 10,000bites.com. And there's a Facebook page for that you can go join and fly and join us in Houston whenever Chef decides he wants to put his Ringling Brothers hat back on. Because you haven't quite got enough going on.
No.
With 2
Not
restaurants,
quite enough.
a winery, a distillery, and all of the private dinners and wine dinners and chef consulting.
And Mrs. McCartney's wine.
And Mrs. McCartney's wines.
Yeah.
Let's not forget that. That is absolutely amazing. Well, we also don't let our guests go, as you know, without a limerick. And so we usually screw it up the first time. And if we do, we'll just do it again.
Okay.
So everybody, while we prep the limerick, go and take a screenshot across the bottom. This will be up on YouTube later, so you'll be able to stream it back. Go visit all of Chef's wonderful websites and worlds. And are you ready, Missy?
I am indeed.
With a 1, 2, 3. We're glad to be joined by Chef Skinner. He's the absolute best for chef's dinners. He's called Willy Wonka, makes ice cream from Tonka. Hold the pudding, we need to get thinner.
Ta-da!
Ta-da.
Ta-da.
That's good.
Yeah, that's probably up for a Grammy,
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Best limerick. I think the Grammy should have a category for you. Best limericks.
All right then.
There you go. Well, thanks, Chef, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Fascinating insight into the world of
Yes.
food and Choctaw and distillery and winery and world travel. And I can't wait to see you. Hopefully we'll find each other
In the next few days.
In the next few
In the
days.
next few days. Yeah.
Thanks, kids.
Okay. Bye-bye.
You have a great time. And we'll see you all of a sudden. See you next Tuesday for Angie's 94th.
That's right.
Okay.
Ciao,
Bye-bye.
ciao. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.